The rescue workers were completely stunned when they pulled the dog Karim out of the grave. He was struggling with everything he had, and rescuers just couldn't understand why. But then they saw it behind the grave, a hole in the ground. Did Karim's strange behavior have anything to do with what was in that hole? When one of the rescuers stuck his hand in the hole, it all started to make sense. The rescue worker was still shaking by what he had just pulled out of the hole. Karim also pulled so hard on the leash that the other rescuer could hardly hold him back. All along, people had thought that the dog was just protecting the grave of its late owner, but it had nothing to do with that person. But it all had to do with something she left behind. A feeling of fear overcame the rescue workers. Did Karim actually dig this up? But what did Karim protect at the grave of his late owner? What did rescue workers pull out of the hole, and why was it so shocking to them? Before we start, can we get this video to 1,000 likes? Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. By this time, Karim had become a fixture at the cemetery. It was not uncommon for the old dog to rest by the stone slab. It had been months now since the old woman had died, but the Kangal didn't seem to care. Several attempts had been made over the past few weeks to persuade the Kangal to leave its new resting place, but to no avail. The woman's family knew how great she thought her dog was and wanted to take care of him on her behalf. But each time they brought treats or toys to drive the animal away. He didn't move an inch. Gladys and Karim had been best friends. The two were inseparable for many years and spent all their time together while Gladys was alive. The family and cemetery staff decided not to pursue it further at this point. The dog was allowed to stay next to its owner. The family even brought him food. Karim sitting over the tombstone was not seen as a problem. The dog stayed mostly peaceful and didn't bark at strangers. There were soon reports of a severe storm moving towards the city. Predictions were deadly. The rain had started to pour and only seemed to be getting worse. Taking this as a sign, the majority of townspeople, including cemetery workers, packed up their valuable belongings and made plans to leave town. About a day and a half later, the rain had turned into a full-blown storm. It was heavy and flooded the streets and caused those who stayed behind to panic with concern. What would you do? Karim stayed in his place. The storm continued to inundate the entire city. Apart from the devoted Kangal, there was no one on the premises, which meant the dog would be without food too. However, this changed little for Karim, who remained steadfast in his place above the tombstone. Was this really just a case of deep loyalty, or was something else at play? The rescue team continued their investigations of the road, looking for people who needed assistance while they sailed on their small lifeboats. The team had no reason to go to the cemetery as it was unoccupied. They remained focused on helping those within their reach. Luckily for the dog, a frantic call came in a short time later. It was an employee from the premises. The clerk was nervous but spoke clearly and begged the rescue team to search the cemetery grounds for the Kangal. He explained Karim's special situation, and finally the men agreed to send a boat towards the cemetery. They would do their best to find the dog, although they doubted it would still be there. It had been 5 days since the storm first struck, and after it had continued to rage, the entire city had been flooded for 3.5 days. All had been isolated from the cemetery. The rescuers were worried. They feared that if the dog really was still lying in his favorite spot above the cemetery, he would be in a bad state when they arrived. After a while, the rescuers made their way to the cemetery. As they expected, the dog lay near the same grave as always. Of course, this sight was a bit sad to see as long as the dog was all alone. After a few minutes, they noticed something really important. The dog owner's grave appeared to be higher than the others, so it wasn't flooded. The rescuers ran upstairs and found Karim still unmoved on the grave. They were very worried about the dog, but they had the courage to call out the dog's name. Hopefully, the dog's reaction was very reassuring. The dog was alive, and the rescuers were more than relieved. They tried to approach the dog with a leash to save him, but that was easier said than done. When the rescuers approached the grave, at no point did the dog immediately go into combat mode. The rescuers felt threatened by the dog as long as Karim showed them his teeth. The dog seemed very angry as long as he started barking aggressively every time they tried to put a hand forward or take another step in his direction. He really didn't want anyone near that palace. Was it really still about protecting its owner? Or did the dog not want to leave the grave for some other reason? After understanding that moving the dog wasn't as easy as it seemed, they thought it might be better not to come to this place in the first place. But as long as they reached the dog, they could not leave him alone. After a while, they finally came up with a plan to rescue this dog and take him to a safe place. They planned to circle the dog from multiple sides, thinking it would be a chance to reach the grave. Actually, this was mainly to distract and confuse the dog. Surprisingly, as long as the dog seemed incredibly confused, the plan actually worked. The dog looked around and he barked madly, baring his teeth, but he had no idea where to go. At that moment, one of the rescuers managed to throw a lasso around the dog's neck. The dog was angrier than ever at that moment. After all this effort, they finally had the animal alive and well, so they tried to calmly pull it back from the grave. After a while, they noticed something very strange. What they actually saw near the tomb was nothing more than a hole dug in the ground. The thought of the hole leading directly to the coffin at 6 feet down was frightening to rescue workers. Therefore, based on this idea, most rescuers began to walk away from the grave. But one of the men stayed behind, perhaps because he was the boldest of the others. The rescuer was sure of one thing: something else was going on with that hole. It was possible that it had nothing to do with Karim's protective behavior at all. But the rescuer decided to leave as long as he thought that the whole situation was not in his hands. After a few minutes, the rescuer decided to look into the hole. When he managed to get into the tomb, he felt something moving there. It felt like several things, so they were very confused. There was something alive inside, but what? Even though he was nervous, he decided to put his hands gently into the hole. He felt something twist into that hole. When he decided to pull it out of the hole, what he saw was far from what he expected. Actually, he found a cute little kitten. After a few seconds, he was surprised to see that there were a couple of kittens in the hole. When they brought her to Karim, the dog immediately calmed down. It was obvious that Karim had protected her. It was the cutest moment of the day, and the rescuers were very relieved because of the dog. Rescuers thought Karim was most likely to find these kittens when the storm began and took them to the only safe place he knew, their owner's grave. That was actually very cute and thoughtful, as the dog wanted to take care of those stray kittens. After a while, rescuers took both Karim and the kitten to safety. They actually decided to take her to the local animal shelter, as it was the safest place for her. When they left Karim and the little cats, the dog was still looking for them. In the end, the kittens and Karim were safe and sound, adopted by a family that kept them together.